Hey guys, tonight we begin with something calm, something ancient, and something humanity has managed to wildly overcomplicate for absolutely no reason. So go ahead and dim the lights a little. Maybe lie back. Let your brain slow down just a bit. Tonight, we're drifting into ancient Egypt, a place of sand, stone, and very confident architecture. And also, apparently, lasers, or aliens, or lost super technology, depending on who you ask. Because for some reason, whenever humans see something impressive from the past, we don't say, wow, they were skilled. No, we say, there is no way they did this without a secret sci-fi toolkit. And honestly, that says more about us than it does about them. So let's just gently float into this question. Did the ancient Egyptians possess advanced technology? Short answer, not really. Long answer, well, let's take our time. Let's start with the obvious star of the show, the pyramids. Specifically, the Great Pyramid of Giza. A structure so precise, so massive, and so stubbornly still standing that people look at it and immediately assume something suspicious happened. Because clearly, if we struggle to build things efficiently today, then people 4,500 years ago must have had some secret advantage. Of course they did. They had time, and labor, and a willingness to do the same thing over and over again without complaining on social media. A truly alien concept. The Great Pyramid was built for a king named Khufu, a man whose main life achievement was being buried in a very expensive triangle, which honestly is not the worst legacy. Now, Khufu didn't personally haul stones around. He mostly supervised in the vague, royal sense of the word, which likely involved sitting somewhere comfortable, occasionally nodding, and trusting that thousands of workers were making his afterlife apartment nice and symmetrical. Because in ancient Egypt, the afterlife wasn't optional. It was the main event. Your entire existence was basically a long preparation for being dead correctly. So naturally, you wanted your tomb to be impressive. And Khufu went a little overboard. Now, here's where the advanced technology idea starts creeping in. The pyramid is made of around 2.3 million stone blocks. Some of them weigh several tons. And yes, that sounds exhausting. Because it was. But instead of imagining thousands of organized workers using ramps, sledges, and simple tools, people prefer to imagine anti-gravity devices, or ancient machines that conveniently disappeared, or aliens who traveled light years just to help humans stack rocks, which is a very generous interpretation of alien priorities. In reality, the Egyptians were extremely good at solving practical problems. They used copper tools. They used stone hammers. They used water to reduce friction when dragging blocks, which is not futuristic. It's just clever. But clever doesn't feel exciting enough. So instead, we upgrade them in our imagination. Because saying they worked really hard and understood basic physics just doesn't hit the same as they had lost advanced technology. Now, let's gently slide over to another favorite topic, the precision of the pyramids. People love pointing out that the Great Pyramid is aligned almost perfectly with the cardinal directions: north, south, east, west, which is true. It's very precise. But here's the thing. You don't need satellites to figure out direction. You need the sky. And the Egyptians were very into the sky. They watched stars constantly. They tracked the sun. They understood patterns. Because when your entire calendar depends on the flooding of the Nile, you pay attention. So, aligning a structure with celestial markers wasn't magic. It was careful observation, repeated over years, with a lot of patience. Again, not very mysterious, just very disciplined, which is slightly less fun to imagine, but much more realistic. Now, speaking of discipline, let's talk about the workforce. Because there's another persistent myth, the idea that the pyramids were built by slaves, which sounds dramatic and tragic and very cinematic. But the evidence suggests something much less chaotic. The workers were actually organized laborers, skilled crews. They lived in nearby settlements. They were fed. They were rotated in shifts. Some of them were even respected, which feels almost disappointing if you were hoping for a dramatic story of suffering and rebellion. Instead, it's more like a large-scale construction project with decent management. And honestly, that might be the most unbelievable part of all. Now, let's drift into something slightly stranger. The so-called mysteries of Egyptian tools. You'll often hear people say things like, "How did they cut stones so precisely without modern equipment?" Which sounds like a fair question. Until you remember, they had thousands of years to practice. They used copper saws. They used abrasive sand. They used repetitive motion. A lot of repetitive motion. Imagine sanding something for hours, every day, for years. Eventually it becomes smooth. Not because of advanced technology, but because humans are very good at slowly wearing things down, including themselves. Now, let's float gently toward one of the more imaginative claims. The idea that Egyptians had electricity. This usually comes from something called the Baghdad Battery, which, to be fair, is not even Egyptian. But that doesn't stop people from connecting dots that were never meant to be connected. Because if there's a mysterious object and a famous civilization, someone will absolutely link them. It's basically a hobby at this point. There are also claims about light bulbs in ancient carvings. You might see images where a shape looks vaguely like a bulb with something snake-like inside it. And immediately the conclusion is, ah yes, ancient electric lighting. Because clearly symbolism is not allowed. Everything must be literal, even in a culture that loved metaphors. The Egyptians used symbols constantly. Snakes represented power, protection, chaos, all sorts of things. But no, it must be a filament. Because why not? Now let's take a slow breath here, because something interesting is happening. Every time we look at ancient Egypt, we seem to assume one of two things. Either they were primitive and clueless, or they were secretly advanced beyond us. There's no middle ground. No acceptance that they were simply human. Very capable humans. With time. With resources, with motivation, and a strong belief that death was just the beginning, which is honestly a powerful incentive to build something that lasts. Let's drift over to another royal figure for a moment. Not Khufu this time, but someone a bit later. A young king named Tutankhamun. Now, Tutankhamun is famous for one main reason. He died, which, to be fair, was not unusual for ancient royalty. But his tomb was discovered almost intact, filled with gold, jewelry, objects so intricate, they still look impressive today. And naturally, people looked at these artifacts and thought, this is too advanced. But again, it wasn't. It was skilled craftsmanship. Artisans who spent their entire lives perfecting techniques. People who understood materials deeply. Gold, for example, is very workable. It bends. It shapes easily. You don't need lasers to make it beautiful. You need patience. And probably a very demanding boss. Tutankhamun himself, by the way, was not exactly the picture of royal perfection. He had health issues, likely due to inbreeding, because royal families loved keeping things in the family, which, as it turns out, is not great for genetics. So while his tomb looked flawless, his actual life was a bit fragile. An interesting contrast. Beautiful afterlife, slightly chaotic reality. And that contrast shows up everywhere in ancient Egypt. Perfect structures built by very imperfect humans. Grand ideas supported by very practical methods. Nothing supernatural, just persistence. Now, as we slowly settle into this idea, we can start to see the real pattern. The advanced technology theory isn't really about Egypt. It's about us. Our discomfort with the idea that people long ago were just as capable as we are. Maybe even more focused. Less distracted. More willing to commit to a single goal for decades. Which, if you think about it, might actually feel more unrealistic than aliens. So instead of giving them credit, we quietly take it away. We replace their effort with mystery, their skill with speculation, because it feels easier, more entertaining, and a little less humbling. But if we slow down and just look at what they actually did, it becomes something else entirely. Not magical, not futuristic, just human. Very, very human. And honestly, that might be the most impressive part. Hey, welcome back. If you're still here, still relaxed, still drifting somewhere between curiosity and sleep, you're doing this exactly right. We're staying in ancient Egypt tonight, still surrounded by warm sand, quiet stone, and a civilization that somehow became the center of every "what if they had secret technology" conversation. Because apparently building impressive things automatically makes you suspicious. So let's just ease back into it. No rush. Let's float over to something tall, elegant, and slightly unnecessary. The obelisk. These were massive stone pillars, usually carved from a single piece of granite, which already sounds like a bad idea, because granite is hard, heavy, and not exactly easy to work with using basic tools. And yet the Egyptians did it anyway. Of course they did. They would carve these enormous blocks out of quarries, especially in places like Aswan, and then somehow transport them hundreds of kilometers, which is where people start getting nervous again. Because moving something that weighs hundreds of tons without modern machinery feels suspicious. So naturally, theories appear. Maybe they used lost machines. Maybe they had secret lifting devices. Maybe, just maybe, gravity worked differently back then, which would be a bold and slightly inconvenient feature of the universe. In reality, the process was slow, painfully slow. They carved trenches around the stone using dolerite pounding stones. Basically, they hit the rock over and over again. For days, weeks, possibly months, which sounds less like advanced technology and more like extreme patience with a hint of stubbornness. Once the obelisk was freed, they transported it using sledges. Wooden sledges, on land, pulled by teams of workers. And here's the clever part. They poured water in front of the sled. not for decoration, to reduce friction, which is a very simple idea that works extremely well. No lasers, no anti-gravity, just wet sand. It's almost disappointingly reasonable. Now let's gently drift into another area where people love to imagine hidden technology. Medicine. Because surely a civilization this advanced must have had futuristic medical knowledge. Something secret. Something ahead of its time. And, to be fair, Egyptian medicine was impressive. They had surgical tools. They performed basic procedures. They documented illnesses. They even had a decent understanding of injuries. But they also believed that diseases could be caused by angry gods or bad spirits. So treatment might involve herbs and also a spell just in case, which is a very balanced approach, covering both the physical and the supernatural. Because why not double down? There are ancient texts like the Ebers Papyrus that list hundreds of remedies. Some are surprisingly practical. Others involve ingredients that feel questionable, like mixing substances that probably smelled terrible and hoping for the best. But here's the key thing. They were experimenting, observing, trying things, sometimes succeeding, sometimes not so much. No advanced biotech, no hidden labs. Just early science still figuring itself out. Now, let's slowly glide towards something that really fascinates people. Mummification. Because preserving a human body for thousands of years feels a little unreal. Almost like some kind of advanced preservation technology. But again, it's not magic. It's chemistry. The Egyptians removed internal organs. Dried the body using natron, a natural salt. Wrapped it carefully, layer by layer, with attention to detail that borders on obsessive. Because once again, the afterlife mattered more than anything. If your body didn't survive, your soul might have trouble recognizing it, which would be awkward. So they made sure it lasted. Not through advanced tech, but through careful process, repeated over centuries, refined over time. It's less like a sudden invention and more like a slow improvement, the kind that happens when people care deeply about getting something right. Now let's drift into a slightly more abstract mystery. Hieroglyphs. Because writing systems always look mysterious, especially when you don't understand them. For a long time, people thought hieroglyphs were purely symbolic, like secret codes or mystical language, something beyond normal writing. But once they were deciphered, thanks to the Rosetta Stone, it became clear it's just a writing system, a very beautiful one, but still practical, used for recording events, religious texts, administrative details, not encrypted messages about hidden technology, just communication, which is slightly less exciting, but much more useful. Now here's something interesting. Every time we don't understand something immediately, we tend to assume it must be extraordinary, instead of just unfamiliar. Ancient Egypt feels distant, different, almost unreal. So we fill in the gaps with imagination, because uncertainty makes us uncomfortable, and mystery, well, mystery sells. Let's gently move toward another famous figure, a woman this time, Cleopatra. Now, Cleopatra lived much later than the pyramid builders, closer to our time than to theirs, which is always a slightly unsettling realization. She ruled during a period when Egypt was already ancient, already layered with history, and already misunderstood. Cleopatra is often associated with luxury, with beauty, with drama, but she was also very intelligent. She spoke multiple languages, understood politics, knew how to maintain power in a complicated world. No secret technology required, just strategy and charisma, and occasionally alliances with powerful Romans, because when in doubt, partner with an empire. Her court likely had advanced knowledge for its time, astronomy, mathematics, medicine. But again, this was accumulated knowledge, not a sudden leap into futuristic science. Just centuries of learning, building on what came before. Very human, very gradual. Now let's slow things down even more, because there's a quiet pattern forming here. Every so-called mystery of ancient Egypt has a similar explanation. Not simple, but understandable. Not magical, but methodical. And maybe that's what makes it hard to accept, because it means the real secret isn't technology. It's consistency. It's showing up every day, doing the work, refining the process, which is honestly a bit exhausting to think about. Much easier to imagine a hidden device, a lost invention, a shortcut, because humans love shortcuts. Even when history quietly tells us there usually aren't any. And so we end up with these stories of advanced ancient tech, of hidden knowledge, of civilizations that somehow knew more than we do. But when you look closely, what they really had was focus and belief and time, lots of time. So as we slowly drift toward the next part, we'll start looking at some of the more persistent myths, the ones that refuse to go away, the ideas that keep resurfacing, no matter how many times they're explained, because humans don't just love history. We love reimagining it, sometimes a little too much. Hey, you're still here, still drifting, still relaxed, still letting ancient Egypt quietly unfold in your mind like a very slow, very sandy documentary. Perfect. Let's keep going. Now we move into the part of the story where things get a little imaginative. Not from the Egyptians, from us. Because this is where the theories really start to stretch. Gently, calmly, confidently stretching reality just a bit too far. Let's begin with one of the most popular ideas. Ancient Egyptian light bulbs. Yes, actual light bulbs. Because somewhere along the way, someone looked at a carving on a temple wall and thought, that looks electrical. And once that idea appears, it never really leaves. These carvings are often found in a temple complex called Temple of Hathor at Dendera, a beautiful site, full of symbolic art, religious imagery, and a very strong commitment to visual storytelling. But in one particular relief, there's a shape, an oval form, with something snake-like inside it, and a line extending out, which, if you look at it with just the right amount of imagination, kind of resembles a giant bulb. So, naturally, the conclusion becomes, ah yes, ancient electricity. Because clearly, the most logical explanation for a symbolic carving in a temple is industrial lighting. Now, if we slow down and just gently observe, the snake isn't a filament. It's a symbol. In Egyptian mythology, snakes often represent energy, creation, or divine power. The oval shape? It's more like a womb or a container of life. And the entire scene is tied to religious ideas about creation and rebirth. But symbolism requires interpretation, and interpretation takes time. So instead, we sometimes go with the quicker option. It's a light bulb, which is deficient, just not accurate. Now, let's float into another favorite, aliens. Because if humans couldn't have done it, then obviously someone else did, preferably from space. This idea got a lot of attention thanks to Ancient Aliens, a show that essentially looked at every impressive ancient structure and said, "Are we sure this wasn't extraterrestrial?" Which is a bold strategy, and also a very profitable one. The logic usually goes like this. The pyramids are too precise. The stones are too large. The alignment is too accurate. Therefore, humans couldn't have done it. Which is interesting, because instead of raising our opinion of ancient humans, we lower it. We assume they weren't capable, that they needed help, that intelligence, craftsmanship, and persistence weren't enough. So we replace them with aliens, who, apparently, traveled across the galaxy just to assist with construction projects, and then left, without leaving behind any actual technology, or tools, or instructions, which feels like a very incomplete collaboration. Now, to be fair, the universe is vast. The idea of extraterrestrial life isn't unreasonable, but the idea that they came here to help stack stones into triangles and then disappeared without a trace, it's a bit specific and slightly underwhelming. You'd expect at least one leftover instruction manual, maybe a labeled button, something. But no, just stones. Very well-placed stones. Now, let's gently shift toward another recurring idea. Lost advanced civilizations. The belief that there was once a highly advanced society, even more advanced than Egypt, that somehow vanished and left behind knowledge that the Egyptians inherited, which sounds dramatic and mysterious, and very appealing, because it adds another layer of depth, another hidden chapter. But again, there's no solid evidence, no remains of advanced machines, no materials that don't fit the time period, no sudden leap in technology that can't be explained. What we see instead is gradual development, tools improving over time, techniques becoming more refined, knowledge being passed down, very slowly, very steadily. It's not a lost supercivilization. It's just continuity, which is less exciting, but far more realistic. Now, let's take a soft pause here, because something important is happening beneath all of this. A quiet pattern, a very human pattern. Every time we encounter something impressive from the past, we have two choices. We can say, they were incredibly capable. Or we can say, there must be something else. And often we choose the second one, because it feels bigger, more mysterious, more entertaining. But it also does something subtle. It takes away credit. It turns real human achievement into something external, something borrowed, something unexplained. And in doing so, we distance ourselves from it. Because if they needed aliens, then we don't have to compare ourselves to them. If they had secret technology, then we don't have to match their effort. It becomes easier, comfortable, a little less intimidating. But the truth, as we've been quietly circling around, is much simpler and maybe a little more humbling. They didn't have advanced technology. They had advanced dedication, which is harder to imagine because dedication doesn't leave behind glowing artifacts. It leaves behind results, structures, objects, things that look almost impossible until you realize they were built one small step at a time. Now, let's gently return to the pyramids for a moment, because they're still there, still standing, still quietly existing in the desert, not as mysteries, but as evidence of planning, of organization, of a society that could coordinate thousands of people toward a single goal, which, honestly, might be the most impressive part of all. Hey, welcome back again. If your eyes are getting a little heavy, if your thoughts are starting to drift in slow circles, that's perfect. That's exactly the pace we want. Nothing sharp, nothing urgent, just a calm glide through history and the stories we keep telling about it. Because now we arrive at something a little different. Not the pyramids, not the tools, not even the theories themselves, but the persistence of those theories, the way they just don't go away, no matter how often they're explained, no matter how many archaeologists gently say, actually, we know how this works. The myths remain, softly, comfortably, like an old story you don't feel like correcting. Let's take a slow look at why. Because it's not really about Egypt. It's about us. Humans love mystery, but not just any mystery. We like the kind that feels just out of reach, but still understandable. Aliens helping build pyramids? That's mysterious but simple. Lost advanced technology? Also mysterious, but neat and tidy. Thousands of workers coordinating logistics over decades? Well, that's complicated and a little exhausting. So we gently choose the version that feels easier to hold in our minds. Not because we're irrational, but because we prefer stories that flow smoothly, even if they're slightly detached from reality. Now, let's drift into another quiet factor. Modern perspective. We live in a world of instant results, machines, automation, digital tools. If something takes too long, we assume something is wrong. So when we look back at ancient Egypt and see something that would take years to build, our instinct is to think, they must have had a faster way, because we would want a faster way. But they weren't in a hurry. Time moved differently. Generations contributed to the same projects. A structure could take decades, and that was completely normal. No one was checking deadlines on a phone. No one was asking for quick updates. They just kept going, steadily, quietly. And that kind of patience is hard for us to imagine. So instead of adjusting our perspective, we adjust the story. We add hidden technology. We add shortcuts. We make it fit our expectations. Now, let's gently shift towards something else. Trust. Or more specifically, a lack of it. There's a subtle skepticism we carry when looking at ancient people. A quiet assumption that they couldn't possibly be as capable as we are, that they were limited, less informed, less advanced. So when we see evidence that challenges that idea, we hesitate, we question it, we look for alternative explanations, because accepting their capability means rethinking our own place in history. It means admitting that intelligence isn't new. That innovation didn't suddenly appear in the modern era. That humans have always been remarkably capable, given the right conditions. And that realization can feel slightly uncomfortable because it removes the illusion of superiority, the idea that we are the peak, the most advanced, the most capable. Instead, it suggests something quieter, that we are part of a long continuum, a very long chain of people figuring things out, one step at a time. Now, let's float gently into the role of storytelling, because these myths, they're not just mistakes, they're narratives, and narratives are powerful. Think about it. Which version is more engaging? A civilization used basic tools, careful planning, and a large workforce to build monumental structures over several decades. Or a lost secret technology allowed ancient builders to achieve impossible precision. One is accurate, the other is captivating. And humans have always leaned toward captivating, even when accuracy is quietly waiting in the background. This is why ideas like aliens or hidden technology keep resurfacing. They're easy to share, easy to remember, easy to imagine. They fit into a pattern we already understand, a pattern where there's always something more, something hidden, something just beyond explanation. But the real story is slower, quieter, less dramatic, and maybe a little more meaningful. Because when you strip away the myths, what you're left with is something very simple. A group of people with tools that weren't advanced, but were effective, with knowledge that wasn't perfect, but was growing, with beliefs that shaped their priorities, and with a level of commitment that's honestly impressive. No shortcuts. No secret devices, just effort, sustained over time. Now, let's take a soft breath here, because there's one more layer to this, a slightly deeper one. These myths don't just tell us how we see the past. They tell us how we see ourselves. When we say, they must have had advanced technology, what we're really saying is, we don't believe we could do that without it. And maybe that's the quiet irony, because the ancient Egyptians didn't have the tools we have. They didn't have machines, or digital systems, or modern engineering software, but they had something else. Focus, structure, a shared vision, and a willingness to commit to that vision for as long as it took. Which is something we still struggle with, even now. So instead of recognizing that, we imagine something easier, something external, something that explains it away. But if we slow down and just sit with the evidence, it becomes clear. They didn't need advanced technology. They were advanced in other ways. Ways that don't always leave behind obvious traces, but show up in the results, quietly, enduringly. And as we gently come to the end of this part, we can start to let go of the question itself. Not completely, just soften it. Hey, you're still here, still floating somewhere between ancient stone and slow thoughts. At this point, the desert is probably very quiet. The pyramids are just silhouettes. And the question we started with has softened a little. Not gone. Just less urgent. So let's gently bring everything together. No big reveals. No dramatic conclusions. Just a calm look at what's actually there. Did the ancient Egyptians possess advanced technology? Not in the way we imagine it. No hidden machines buried under the sand. No electrical grids quietly powering temples. No lost devices waiting to be rediscovered. What they had was simpler, and in a way, more demanding. They had knowledge, built slowly, passed down carefully, refined over generations, not downloaded, not suddenly discovered, just accumulated. They had tools, basic ones, copper chisels, stone hammers, wooden sledges, nothing flashy, nothing futuristic, but used with skill and repetition, they became enough, more than enough. They had organization, which might be the most overlooked part, because moving massive stones isn't just about strength. It's about coordination, planning, timing, feeding workers, housing them, keeping everything running, day after day, without emails, without spreadsheets, without someone saying, "Hey, quick update," just systems held together by human effort. And they had belief, a very strong one, that what they were building mattered, not just for their lifetime, but for eternity. That kind of belief changes how you work. It changes how long you're willing to keep going, how much effort you're willing to invest, because you're not building for now. You're building for forever. And when you combine all of that, knowledge, tools, organization, belief, you get results that feel almost impossible, but aren't. Now, let's gently touch on something a little ironic. If the ancient Egyptians had possessed advanced technology, we would probably know. There would be traces, materials that don't belong, artifacts that don't fit, sudden jumps in capability that can't be explained. But we don't see that. What we see is continuity, gradual improvement, techniques evolving over time, mistakes being corrected, skills being sharpened. It's not a mystery. It's a process. A very long, very patient process. And maybe that's the part we struggle with, because it's not dramatic. It doesn't have a twist. It doesn't offer a shortcut. It just says, if you work at something long enough, you can achieve a lot. Which is true, and also slightly inconvenient, because it means the pyramids aren't evidence of something beyond us. They're evidence of what humans can do, with enough time, enough focus, and enough people willing to keep showing up. Now let's take one last slow drift through the scene. The desert still and quiet. The pyramids steady and unmoving. No hidden energy fields. No silent machines humming beneath the sand. Just stone, carefully placed, one piece at a time. And somewhere in that stillness, there's a kind of calm realization. Nothing supernatural happened here. No secret was lost. No advanced civilization vanished without a trace. What happened was simpler. People decided to build something enormous. And then they did. Slowly, patiently, over years that blurred into decades. And when you look at it that way, it becomes less mysterious, but maybe a little more meaningful. Because it brings everything back to something very quiet, very human. The ability to imagine something, and then keep working on it, long enough to make it real. No shortcuts. No hidden technology. Just time, effort, and a willingness to continue even when progress feels slow. So, as we gently settle into the end of this story, you can let the question fade. Not because it's been dramatically answered, but because it doesn't need to be. The pyramids are still there. The evidence is still there. And the explanation is already enough.
So you can rest with that.
Let the thoughts slow down. Let the curiosity soften. And just drift, knowing that sometimes the simplest answer is also the most impressive one.
Good night.
Hey, if you're still here, still half awake, still letting your thoughts drift in that slow, quiet way, we can keep going a little longer. No new mysteries. No sudden twists.
Just a soft landing.
Because even after everything we've gently walked through, the pyramids, the tools, the myths, something interesting remains. The stories don't stop. They never really do. Even now, people are still asking the same question, still making the same videos, writing the same theories, connecting the same imaginative dots. Because once a mystery becomes part of culture, it settles in, comfortably, like a familiar bedtime story. And ancient Egypt, well, it's the perfect setting. Endless desert, massive structures, symbols that look like they're hiding something. It almost invites speculation. It practically whispers, "Go ahead, imagine something." And we do, over and over again. Sometimes it's harmless curiosity, a sense of wonder, a desire to understand something distant and unfamiliar. And that part is nice. It's human. It's what keeps history alive. But sometimes it turns into something else. A quiet refusal to accept simple explanations. A preference for the extraordinary, even when the ordinary is already remarkable. Because the truth is, there's nothing ordinary about what the Egyptians achieved. We just call it ordinary because we've explained it. Once something is understood, it loses its mystery. And once it loses its mystery, we start looking for a new one.
So the story evolves.
From pyramids to hidden chambers. From tools to lost technology. From craftsmanship to aliens. Always moving. Always searching for something just beyond reach. But if you slow everything down and just sit with what's actually there, you begin to notice something different, something quieter. The real story isn't about what we don't know. It's about what we already do. We know how the stones were cut, not perfectly, but well enough. We know how they were moved, not easily, but effectively. We know how the structures were planned, carefully, deliberately. There are no missing pieces that require science fiction to fill. Just details we're still refining, understanding a little more each year. And that's how knowledge works. Not in sudden leaps, but in small, steady steps. Now let's gently zoom out for a moment. Beyond Egypt, beyond the desert. Because this pattern doesn't only happen here. It happens everywhere. Ancient structures in different parts of the world, monuments, temples, cities. Whenever something seems impressive enough, we start to question it, to wonder if there was something more, something hidden. It's almost like we're uncomfortable with the idea that humans, across different times and places, were capable of doing incredible things without modern tools. And maybe that discomfort is worth noticing, not judging, just noticing. Because it quietly shapes how we see the past and how we see ourselves. If we believe ancient people needed help, then we don't have to measure ourselves against them. We don't have to ask whether we could do the same or more. But if we accept that they did it on their own, with limited tools, limited knowledge, but unlimited patience, then the question changes. It becomes, what are we capable of if we focus like that? And that's a heavier question, a quieter one, but also a more meaningful one. Now let's come back to the desert, back to the stillness. The pyramids haven't changed. They're not revealing new secrets. They're not suddenly glowing with hidden energy. They're just there, as they've always been. And maybe that's enough. Because not everything needs to be mysterious to be meaningful. Not everything needs a hidden layer. Sometimes the surface is already deep enough. A structure built with intention. A civilization shaped by belief. A legacy that lasts not because of magic, but because of persistence. And as we slowly bring this to a close, you can let all the extra ideas fade. The aliens, the secret devices, the lost technologies. Let them drift away.
Gently.
No need to argue with them. No need to push them out. Just let them pass. And what's left is something very simple, very calm, very human. A group of people standing in the sun, lifting stone after stone, day after day, not because they had advanced technology, but because they had a reason to keep going. And somehow, that quiet determination was enough. So now you can rest with that. Let your thoughts slow down even more. Let the story settle. No mystery to solve. No puzzle left behind. Just a long, steady echo of human effort, stretching across time and fading softly into the night. Hey, if you're still here, still half awake, still letting your thoughts drift in that slow, quiet way, we can keep going a little longer. No new mysteries, no sudden twists, just a soft landing. Because even after everything we've gently walked through, the pyramids, the tools, the myths, something interesting remains. The stories don't stop. They never really do. Even now, people are still asking the same question, still making the same videos, writing the same theories, connecting the same imaginative dots. Because once a mystery becomes part of culture, it settles in, comfortably, like a familiar bedtime story. And ancient Egypt, well, it's the perfect setting. Endless desert, massive structures, symbols that look like they're hiding something. It almost invites speculation. It practically whispers, go ahead, imagine something. And we do, over and over again. Sometimes it's harmless curiosity, a sense of wonder, a desire to understand something distant and unfamiliar. And that part is nice. It's human. It's what keeps history alive. But sometimes it turns into something else. A quiet refusal to accept simple explanations. A preference for the extraordinary, even when the ordinary is already remarkable. Because the truth is, there's nothing ordinary about what the Egyptians achieved. We just call it ordinary because we've explained it. Once something is understood, it loses its mystery. And once it loses its mystery, we start looking for a new one.
So the story evolves.
From pyramids to hidden chambers. From tools to lost technology. From craftsmanship to aliens. Always moving. Always searching for something just beyond reach. But if you slow everything down and just sit with what's actually there, you begin to notice something different, something quieter, The real story isn't about what we don't know. It's about what we already do. We know how the stones were cut. Not perfectly, but well enough. We know how they were moved. Not easily, but effectively. We know how the structures were planned.
Carefully.
Deliberately. There are no missing pieces that require science fiction to fill. Just details we're still refining, understanding a little more each year. And that's how knowledge works. Not in sudden leaps, but in small, steady steps. Now, let's gently zoom out for a moment. Beyond Egypt, beyond the desert. Because this pattern doesn't only happen here. It happens everywhere. Ancient structures in different parts of the world, monuments, temples, cities. Whenever something seems impressive enough, we start to question it, to wonder if there was something more, something hidden. It's almost like we're uncomfortable with the idea that humans, across different times and places, were capable of doing incredible things without modern tools. And maybe that discomfort is worth noticing, not judging, just noticing. Because it quietly shapes how we see the past and how we see ourselves. If we believe ancient people needed help, then we don't have to measure ourselves against them. We don't have to ask whether we could do the same or more. But if we accept that they did it on their own, with limited tools, limited knowledge, but unlimited patience, then the question changes. It becomes, what are we capable of if we focus like that? And that's a heavier question, a quieter one, but also a more meaningful one. Now let's come back to the desert, back to the stillness. The pyramids haven't changed. They're not revealing new secrets. They're not suddenly glowing with hidden energy. They're just there, as they've always been. And maybe that's enough. Because not everything needs to be mysterious to be meaningful. Not everything needs a hidden layer. Sometimes the surface is already deep enough. A structure built with intention. A civilization shaped by belief. A legacy that lasts not because of magic, but because of persistence. And as we slowly bring this to a close, you can let all the extra ideas fade. The aliens, the secret devices, the lost technologies. Let them drift away.
Gently.
No need to argue with them. No need to push them out. Just let them pass. And what's left is something very simple, very calm, very human. A group of people standing in the sun, lifting stone after stone, day after day, not because they had advanced technology, but because they had a reason to keep going. And somehow, that quiet determination was enough. So now you can rest with that. Let your thoughts slow down even more. Let the story settle. No mystery to solve. No puzzle left behind. Just a long, steady echo of human effort, stretching across time and fading softly into the night. Hey, if you're still listening, still letting your mind drift in that slow, quiet way, we can stay here just a little longer. No new theories, no new mysteries, just a gentle winding down. At this point, the question we started with, did the ancient Egyptians possess advanced technology? Feels different, not because it changed, but because it softened. It's no longer something to solve, just something to sit with. Because after all the stories, all the speculation, all the quiet debunking. We're left with something very simple. They didn't need advanced technology. They needed time. And they had it. A kind of time that feels almost impossible now.
Slow time.
Uninterrupted time. Time that stretches across years, decades, even generations, without urgency, without pressure to finish quickly. A pyramid wasn't a project. It was a commitment, something that outlived the people who started it, something that continued long after they were gone. And that changes everything, because when you're not racing against time, you can do things differently. You can repeat the same action again and again and again until it becomes precise, until it becomes reliable, until it becomes almost effortless. Not because it's easy, but because it's familiar. Now, let's gently imagine it for a moment. Not dramatically, just quietly. A group of workers early morning, the air still cool, the sun just beginning to rise over the desert. No machines, no noise of engines, just voices, footsteps, the slow scrape of stone against sand. Someone pours water in front of a sledge. Another adjusts the ropes. They pull together, not perfectly, not in perfect harmony, but close enough. The stone moves, a little at first, then a bit more. And that's it. That's the moment. Nothing spectacular, nothing cinematic, just progress. And then they do it again, and again, and again. Days blur into weeks, weeks into months, months into years. And somewhere along the way, the impossible becomes normal. Not because it suddenly got easier, but because they never stopped. Now, from a distance, from our distance, it looks like a miracle, something beyond explanation, because we're seeing the result, not the repetition. We see the finished pyramid, not the millions of small movements that created it. And that gap, that distance between effort and result, that's where the myths grow. That's where we start to imagine shortcuts, hidden tools, advanced knowledge, because filling that gap with patience feels too quiet, too ordinary. But the truth, the quiet, steady truth, is that nothing filled that gap except time. Now, let's take a slow breath here, because there's one last thing to notice. Even today, with all our modern technology,
We don't always build things that last.
not like this. We build faster, higher, more efficiently, but not always with the same sense of permanence. Ancient Egypt built for eternity, not metaphorically, literally. And that intention shows. It's still there, in every stone, in every alignment, in every structure that refused to disappear. No upgrades, no hidden systems, no secret power sources, just design aimed at lasting as long as possible. And somehow, that worked. So, as the night settles in, and everything becomes a little quieter, you can let that thought stay with you. Not as a mystery, not as a question,
Just as an observation.
that sometimes what looks impossible is just the result of doing something simple for a very, very long time. And maybe that's enough. The pyramids are still there. The desert is still quiet. And the story doesn't need anything more.
So you can let it fade now. Slowly. Gently.
No final reveal. No hidden truth waiting underneath. Just stone. Just time.
Just people who kept going.
And that quiet effort, echoing long after they're gone.
Good night.
Hey, if you've made it this far, you're probably right on the edge of sleep. Thoughts slowing down. Breathing a little softer. Everything feeling quieter. So we'll keep this gentle. No new ideas. No new arguments. Just a final drift. By now, ancient Egypt doesn't feel like a puzzle anymore. It feels settled. The pyramids aren't asking questions. They're not hiding secrets. They're just there. Still. Silent. Unbothered by everything we've imagined about them. And that's kind of the strange part. All the theories, all the speculation, all the debates, none of it changes the stones. They don't respond. They don't confirm anything. They don't deny anything. They just exist. Which means the mystery was never really in the pyramids. It was in us. In the way we look at things we don't fully understand. In the way we try to fill quiet spaces with bigger stories. In the way we gently resist simple explanations. Because they feel too small for something so large. But sometimes, simple doesn't mean small. Sometimes, simple just means clear. A stone placed on another stone, then another, until something massive appears. Not suddenly, not magically, just gradually. And when you stretch that process over years, over lifetimes, it starts to feel impossible, even though every step was completely possible. That's the quiet trick of time. It turns small actions into something that looks like a miracle. Now, as everything slows down even more, you can let go of the question completely. No need to hold on to it. No need to solve it. Did the ancient Egyptians have advanced technology? It doesn't really matter anymore. Because what they did have was already enough to explain everything we see. And maybe more importantly, it's something we still have too. The ability to focus, to repeat, to improve,
To keep going.
even when progress feels slow. Even when results are far away. That quiet, steady effort, the kind that doesn't look impressive in the moment, but becomes impressive over time. That's the real story. No secrets, no hidden layers, no lost knowledge waiting to be rediscovered.
Just people.
Doing something difficult
For a very long time.
and leaving behind something that lasted. So now, you can let the desert fade. Let the pyramids disappear into the dark. Let the question drift away completely. Nothing left to figure out. Nothing left to imagine. Just a calm, quiet ending. And somewhere, far away, under a sky full of stars, those stones are still resting, exactly where they were placed, thousands of years ago. Unchanged, unbothered, unmysterious. And somehow, that's enough.
Good night.
Hey, if you've made it this far, you're probably right on the edge of sleep. Thoughts slowing down, breathing a little softer, everything feeling quieter. So we'll keep this gentle. No new ideas, no new arguments, just a final drift. By now, ancient Egypt doesn't feel like a puzzle anymore. It feels settled. The pyramids aren't asking questions. They're not hiding secrets. They're just there. Still. Silent. Unbothered by everything we've imagined about them. And that's kind of the strange part. All the theories, all the speculation, all the debates, none of it changes the stones. They don't respond. They don't confirm anything. They don't deny anything. They just exist. Which means the mystery was never really in the pyramids. It was in us. In the way we look at things we don't fully understand. In the way we try to fill quiet spaces with bigger stories. In the way we gently resist simple explanations because they feel too small for something so large. But sometimes, simple doesn't mean small. Sometimes, simple just means clear. A stone placed on another stone, then another, until something massive appears. Not suddenly, not magically, just gradually. And when you stretch that process over years, over lifetimes, it starts to feel impossible, even though every step was completely possible. That's the quiet trick of time. It turns small actions into something that looks like a miracle. Now, as everything slows down even more, you can let go of the question completely. No need to hold on to it.
No need to solve it.
Did the ancient Egyptians have advanced technology? It doesn't really matter anymore. Because what they did have was already enough to explain everything we see. And maybe more importantly, it's something we still have too. The ability to focus, to repeat, to improve,
To keep going.
even when progress feels slow, even when results are far away. That quiet, steady effort, the kind that doesn't look impressive in the moment, but becomes impressive over time. That's the real story. No secrets, no hidden layers, no lost knowledge waiting to be rediscovered.
Just people.
Doing something difficult
For a very long time.
and leaving behind something that lasted. So now, you can let the desert fade. Let the pyramids disappear into the dark. Let the question drift away completely. Nothing left to figure out. Nothing left to imagine. Just a calm, quiet ending. And somewhere, far away, under a sky full of stars, those stones are still resting, exactly where they were placed, thousands of years ago. Unchanged, unbothered, unmysterious. And somehow, that's enough.
Good night.
Hey, if you're still here, then you've done something very rare. You stayed with one slow idea all the way to the end. No rush, no distractions, just a steady drift. So now we don't need to add anything new. This isn't a place for answers anymore. It's a place for letting go. The question we started with, did the ancient Egyptians possess advanced technology, has gently dissolved, not because it was fully defeated, but because it no longer needs to exist. Everything around it has softened. The pyramids aren't puzzles anymore. They're just present. And maybe that's the quiet shift, not from mystery to certainty, but from tension to calm. Because sometimes the goal isn't to know more. It's to feel okay with knowing enough. Ancient Egypt doesn't need to be extraordinary in a hidden way. It already is in an open one. Stone placed with intention. Time stretched across generations. People doing something again and again and again until it became permanent. No secret tools. No lost machines. No hidden forces quietly working in the background. Just effort. Quiet, steady, unremarkable effort that slowly became remarkable. And now, all of that effort has settled into stillness. Nothing is moving anymore. Nothing is being built. Nothing is being changed. It's finished. And it has been for a very long time. So there's nothing left to chase. Nothing left to question. Nothing left to imagine into something bigger. You can let all of that go.
Gently.
Let the theories drift away. Let the curiosity soften. Let the need for answers fade. And just sit with what remains. A quiet desert, a dark sky, and shapes on the horizon that don't ask for anything. They don't need explanation. They don't need interpretation. They don't even need attention. They simply are. And in a strange, calm way, that's enough.
So now,
you can let your thoughts slow down completely. Let the story fade out. Let the last bits of curiosity settle into silence. Nothing more to add. Nothing more to say. Just rest. And somewhere far away, under the same quiet sky, those stones are still there, exactly as they've always been. Unchanged, untroubled, unfinished, only in the sense that they don't need to continue. And now, neither do we.
good night.